All right, hello and welcome to Iwinati Africa. Just in case you're joining us for the first time, please tell us where you're joining from and we'll be happy to announce your presence. We're happy to have you again today. I received an amazing level of support last week for our platform, and I want to appreciate that. He asked me to make it anonymous, but I want to say that you can support us not with money, but you can support us by sharing this post, letting other people know what we're doing, asking the poignant questions about African business, devotion, and culture. Today, we're going to be talking to two amazing icons who have written books about subjects that are very dear to our hearts as Africans, that are fundamental parts of our history. The subject of war and the subject of slavery. So wherever you are listening in from, please post it in the chat. Let's know where you are listening in from, and be ready to make your contribution to this conversation, whether you're watching us on YouTube, on Facebook, or on LinkedIn. So I'm going to start right away this way. Today I have with me, yes, two amazing icons. First of all, I'm going to introduce them. Now allow them to say hello to the audience. I'm going to start with Mrs. Titilola Louisa Natasha Anidugbe. If the name is very, I always find it very sophisticated, the name. And maybe some of you are watching who have worked with her in Airtel, Nigeria. I wanted to just say hello and hi to her. She's an amazing person. Attention to detail, top notch. I used to boast those days that my boss is a Lean Six Sigma certified boss. It was amazing those early days when people didn't know about Lean Six Sigma. So she made a lot of contributions to my progress in my IT career. I hope the sound is still good. And she's here today, and she's going to be talking to us not about IT, not about service management, but about her book, which is coming within the year, Emancipados of Lagos. I hope I got that right. That is from Portuguese, Emancipados of Lagos. So Titi, please say hello to the audience online.
Welcome, everybody, and thank you, Kenneth, for the introduction. I've had a very interesting career, as you clearly outlined. But yes, I'm right now completing my work on my ancestors, which really started in 1994 with the help of my father and my sister. The name Marinho, it just begged for further investigation. So hence we started looking. And since then, I have been able to put together quite a bit of information on what happened and how that came to be. Thank you.
Awesome. Amazing. Thank you very much, Titi. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for joining us today. So I have another amazing guest. He's an engineer by training, and he spent decades of his life working with one of the big oil companies, global oil companies in the world. And he started writing in the 80s. I have his book here, Ofia Became Home, and we're going to talk a little about what is written here regarding the Nigeria-Biafran civil war. And he's going to tell us his thoughts. It's a very personalized account because he speaks of it. He stars in the book. He's a character in the book, so to speak. And he has written it up to 373 pages of solid content. And we're going to ask him about this book today. Please say hello to the audience perfectly. So I'm going to turn to Titi for a few minutes. Right? I'm going to ask you to talk about your book. So the interest, I got very much interested in the book because of the fact that it speaks to the history of us as a people. know every black person is very much acquainted with the subject of slavery, and probably something that has been embedded, so to speak, in our psyche and the way we see ourselves in comparison to those who enslaved us, so to speak. So let me ask, what sparked your interest in writing about the history of your ancestors in the context of slavery? And is this something that we should be passing on to our children?
Okay. My interest was basically sparked from the moment I started school. Um, when you go to school and everybody else's name is Adeumi, Adeleke, Adeni, and your name is Marino, you
Mm-hmm.
you go home and you ask some questions, and that really was the start for me. However, at some point, once I come back from school abroad, I actually sat with my father and my sister, as I said earlier, and we started asking some questions, some very basic questions. Um, why do we have a Portuguese name?
Mm-hmm.
Where did our ancestor come from? Who was he? What was his name? And we we found that nobody really knew the answers, and so that sparked my father's interest. And really, without him, I wouldn't have gotten as far as I've gotten in terms of documenting
Mm-hmm.
everything. Because my father then went out and bought every history book that had ever been printed, and made inquiries within the family, um,
Mm-hmm.
to find some of the answers to some of our very basic questions. But to put it simply, in the last 3 4 years, um, I picked up where he left off. He's now late, and
Mm-hmm.
in that time, I've been able to find out the name of my ancestor. He came from Oyo. He was taken
Okay.
to Brazil. He worked in Brazil. He was a slave of a very, very wealthy slave um, trader, and he adopted the man's name. So, whilst his first name was Geronimo, his master's name was Joaquim Pereira Marino. And so he
Mm-hmm.
became Geronimo Joaquim Pereira Marino. And,
Okay.
I found documents in Brazil, documents in Wida, because when he came back, he didn't actually come to Lagos. He actually
Okay.
settled in Wida, where a lot of former oil slaves settled. So he
Okay.
settled in a community. And it is his second son who picked up and came to Lagos. And all the Marinos in my own family are the product of his second son. There are other Marinos in Lagos, and coincidentally, I've also found original documents from Brazil that indicate that their ancestor was also a slave of the same man, Joaquim Pereira Marino, and so consequently, the two families know themselves very well. And on Lagos Island, there is a community which development has sort of, I don't know, affected.
Mm.
I won't say badly, but it has made the community a little different. When I was growing up, that community was very close, still very close. And somewhere in the 80s and 90s, with the development of Lagos Island, the community got dispersed. And so I talk a lot about what has happened as a consequence of our ancestors coming back, settling,
Okay.
developing, and then, moving out of the island. And so that's really what the book is about. And so, as a consequence, it's not just my ancestor that's covered in the book, because, of
Mm.
course, his children married other returnees. They
Yeah.
were all called returnees. Some of them
Mm-hmm.
came back from Brazil, some of them, like my ancestor, but some of them also came back from Sierra Leone, because ships going to the Americas that were captured by the British were taken to Sierra Leone and offloaded. All the slaves were offloaded there, and they started families there. And first and second generation in Sierra Leone also came back to Lagos Island. And there was a mix. By the time a generation had passed, they were marrying each other,
Mm-hmm.
and literally formed this larger community with the Aworis, who are the indigenous Lagosians. And
Okay.
so
Wow.
the story is quite vast in what it goes into.
Okay. Well, that's awesome. So, in essence, the identity of these original Yorubas was merged with a Portuguese identity. So
Yes,
the slaves were now answering the names of the slave owners, so much so you had to do an investigation to
yes,
discover how that happened.
yes.
That's
And
amazing.
Yorubas were not the only ones. I mean, I
Yes.
have relations from Bida. I found relations who were Hausa,
Mm-hmm.
and so on. So yeah, it was quite a blend that happened and
Okay.
ended up in Brazil.
Wow. So how did it make you feel discovering this part of your history, so to speak?
History, I feel, has many things that it gives you as an individual. It gave me a sense of identity, sense of self
Mm-hmm.
worth. It enabled me to see the value systems, both the Yoruba unadulterated value system as well as the adopted value systems of my ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
They came back and they were, literally the first Christians on the west coast of Africa, because they came back as Catholics,
Mm-hmm.
and they were very staunch religious people. Some of them were Catholic, some of them were Muslim, some of them
Okay.
worshipped Ifa and continued to do so irrespective of being Christian or Muslim. They actually
Mm.
continued with their traditional beliefs. And
Okay.
the book goes into detail about who was doing what and how they were doing it.
Okay. Wow. All right. We'd like to thank Uche. Thank you, James, for joining us from Lagos and Canada, respectively. All right. I'm going to turn to Ndukwe Uche and ask him a little bit about his book, Ofia Became Home. And like I said, I have a copy of it right here. So it's a physical, literal book. Let me make sure I'm the one. This is it. Ofia Became Home, available on Amazon. And I'm going to ask him a little question to start with about the book. So what drove your interest in writing about this book? I hope you can hear me clearly now.
Well, war itself sparked my interest in writing the book, Ofia Became Home. I was an ordinary child victim of the Nigeria-Biafra war. I was one of the thousands of Igbere people who ended up in the forest for 9 months.
Mm.
So it was my experience in the Nigeria-Biafra war that sparked my interest in writing about war from the perspective of ordinary people. Also, long ago, I came to the realization that many published stories on wars rarely do justice to the heroism displayed by ordinary people well behind the front lines.
Mm-hmm.
They rarely do justice to the misery unleashed on ordinary people. Today, if we turn on our televisions, we see the horror of Ukrainians hunkering down in their subways or rushing to trains that are already full of people. We shudder at that, but all we see is a mere scratch on the surface of the misery unfolding for those people.
Mm.
So we never really know anything of significance about the suffering of people in all these wars. What Ofia Became Home tries to do is to delve into the behind the scenes details of what ordinary people have to contend with when all these wars are visited on them. Usually we focus on the politics of war. Usually we focus on the machineries of war. We focus on the heroes of war. We touch very lightly on the suffering of ordinary people. The 5-minute TV segments don't come close to showing us what people truly go through. So Ofia Became Home is an attempt to balance the picture a little bit and shine some light on how people suffer, mostly outside of the view of the cameras. Okay?
Yes, yes. Thank you so much for that. And that is very sobering, especially in the face of the current events that the world has become involved in, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And our hearts go out to those who are affected. And like you said, we can argue about it, politicize it, and all that, but people are affected. Real people are affected. Please, can you tell us a little bit about specifically the Igbere people? What was Igbere like before the war, during the war? I mean, what was the specific? What made Igbere special in their experience with this war? I hope you heard that.
Anyway, as I was saying, Igbere was a very compact rural community before the war. A very traditional Igbo community, a high-density place because for some reason our ancestors chose to live together. We lived together in traditional compounds that were highly packed, comprising of concentric rows of houses. Our farms were very far away from where we lived, but we were highly organized. Igbere has continued to be a very organized, a very organized, a very orderly place. That has allowed us to develop the community to the extent that, as I said before, people insist that it is no longer a village. We are a people that work together on common issues. We are an enterprising people that love our community. People pride the homes they build in Igbere higher than they do the ones they build outside.
Yes, I'll come back to you on that. So essentially, these were people living together, own way of life, and generally knew what they were about in their own context. And then the war disrupted our lives. So let me go back to Titi very briefly. I'm going to start to talk about the impact of such of these experiences, in essence, the impact of these experiences to a people. So we have the aspect of slavery affecting the entirety of Africa, so to speak. We have war affecting the entirety of Africa, but today we're focusing on a specific set of people. And I ask myself, how has this affected the way we relate with each other? For example, the way a black person sees himself in comparison to a white person. And then on the other hand, the way an Igbo person sees himself in comparison to a Yoruba person. Incidentally, for those who do not know, Ndukwe is Igbo and Titi is Yoruba. So if we were in the Biafran war, Titi would have been on the Nigerian side, and Ndukwe would have been on the Yoruba side, and on the Biafran side. We are talking to a global audience, and in our audience we have whites, blacks, Indians, and so on. And we're talking about slavery. So from in your perspective, starting with Titi, how do these things impact the way we relate with each other today? Do you think the knowledge of our history of slavery impacts our self-esteem? Are we still operating, for example, as slaves when we work outside Africa or when we work for foreigners, even in our own country? What do you think about that? On it, yeah. You can please unmute.
Just from a historical perspective, I deal with history from about the 1650s all the way through to 1650s to the early 19th, 20th century, rather. And war impacted slavery very definitely. All the slaves carted out of Africa were almost from about the 17th century, 18th century, and 19th century, all based on wars.
Mm.
If I wage war against you and I win, I get to plunder your entire population and put them on ships and ship them off to wherever in the Americas. And that really, it spurred whole nations or ethnic groups to wage war consistently. So that's the background, or that's the view I have of war based on my own research.
Mm-hmm.
The Oyo Empire was a little different. That had disintegrated from within, and because the politics within the empire had made it weak, its civil defenses became weak, and so when it was attacked from Usman Danfodio and from Dahomey, it was already very weak and so susceptible. So the people that we call slaves were actually normal, everyday citizens. They were not slaves here in Africa necessarily, not all of them. And some of them were just picked up because maybe I'm on a bandwagon, a trading mission, and we are cornered by highway robbers, and I become a slave. Or I could have just gone fishing and been caught on my own and become a slave. So not everybody had the same experience, but generally speaking, that's how most of them became slaves.
Wow.
I refer to slavery as a label and not really as a condition. It is a label. In terms of how we see ourselves, I would say it definitely still affects us. I did not meet one person in my community, that would be the returnee Brazilian community, that was happy or even willing to discuss an ancestor that was a slave.
Mm.
The impact of that is the history is then not told because we're already ashamed. We're already on the defensive. And these are some sad facts because when you probe even a little bit more, you find that these people were extraordinary. They were really very visionary. They came back having picked up a lot from where they had been and contributed immensely to the development of what we now call Nigeria. The first place to be colonized in Nigeria was Lagos, and that was where they all lived. And they are the ones who came back with the skill sets to do buildings in concrete, to build roads, to put street lights in. They understood what hospitals were like. They were coming from environments where those things already existed, and they brought the skills to build and develop those things back with them. And so when we look at Lagos and we say, oh, it's very progressive compared to the rest of Nigeria, these are the people who started that road on that progression. So I think we should be proud of our history. I really do. But overcoming the stigma of having an ancestor who was called a slave is still very traumatic. And I think it has to do a lot with the fact that as Black people, we still suffer from racism, we still suffer from various injustices and all of that. And even within our country, you are right. Even within our country, we are still, I don't know, not quite able to overcome the racism in its entirety. Our leaders still haven't put the greater good before themselves. And I think that really is what I took away from all the reading and all the investigations that I did.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much. Deep thoughts there. Mazin Namdi says history should be deployed as a tool for the promotion of our shared humanity hinged on equality, fairness, and justice. And just like what you said, Titi, that we are impacted by our history, even when we're not there. We'll rather sever ourselves from ancestors that were inferior to the rest of the world. And we still, to some extent, feel inferior to those who enslaved us so long ago. So let me ask you too. Today, just linking with what Mazin Nambi has just said, today people are talking about reparation. People are blaming white people for everything. What do you think our relationship with people we'll call white, or we call, those who are in quotes at fault? What do you think our relationship should be? There are versions of Pan-Africanism that say the fault is those that have a different color. They should be made to pay for the sins of the past. What are your thoughts on reparation and all this thing that may look like racism in the reverse direction?
I do treat the subject matter of reparations in the book, not least of all because I heard it from community members, but I actually came to the conclusion that I was not equipped to adequately deal with the question of reparations. Because to me, I had to ask myself, what is being paid for? Is it for the suffering and the pain, the anguish? What is the price of human suffering? Those who died or those who lived? What are we paying for? If we are asking somebody to pay, and then you come to modern day and you realize slavery hasn't ended, so it's still an ongoing crime. So when a crime is ongoing and there are so many people involved in the crime, and so many people are injured, and so many people are still feeling like it's very much in the present, how are you going to start to, atone for something that's still ongoing? To me, the real question is, how are we going to put an end to slavery? That's really it. I feel like dwelling on that question of reparations has kept us back from looking to the future, which is Pan-Africanism, and saying, let's put our efforts into our future now. I'm not saying forget what happened in the past. It has a lot of good and important things we can learn from. But I'm saying maybe all our energies placed into thinking of what is going to happen in the future for our children's children would be more valuable. Looking for leaders with a vision, looking to develop leaders with a vision is of more importance than looking back and saying reparations, because that is like it's like a bog. You put your foot in and it'll just drag you down. I don't see that
so
it
much
is
for that.
moving us forward.
Is really not going to create much of the solutions that we may need at this time. We need to look further into the future. Thank you so much for that. James says the narrative contributions from those who have had slave ancestors are extremely important for the collective knowledge and understanding. And I like that because it links with what ND said at the beginning, that when we think of things like war or these catastrophic behaviors as something to be analyzed academically, and this analysis is even going on now with respect to Ukraine and Russia, when we're analyzing it intellectually, reading of it that way, it doesn't come close like it is with those who actually felt the pain of war or felt the pain of slavery. And you're talking about, if we're asking people to pay, how much can you possibly pay? We should be asking, what will our future look like relative to how we are now? How can we change the way we are? And someone said that the story of the hunt is typically told from the perspective of the lion. So we don't hear the perspective of the deer. And you telling the story of slavery from your family's perspective, that is another perspective which the world has to hear. Thank you very much for that. I'm going to turn over to Ndukwe about the war, the Nigerian civil war, and relationships with people. I'm going to talk about relationships that are building up now in the context of the Nigerian political construct. And I'm asking the question, how are we relating with each other today? How has the war impacted Igbos, Hausas, Yorubas, and all the other tribes? How does conflict generally impact the relationship of the people who have to live together after the conflict? And what do you think is the impact today in the Nigerian society? Ndukwe, please.
Okay, I think I got most of that. I would say that the war impacted relationships very poorly. The antagonisms with other Nigerian tribes which existed before the war and which partly led to the war were very loudly amplified by the war. Having your properties seized and declared abandoned, having your bank savings reduced to £20 regardless of how much you left in the account for 3 years, missing out on the windfall of a hasty indigenization decree that transferred foreign-owned companies to Nigerians so soon after the war. None of that laid the foundations for positive outcome, for positive post-war relationships in Nigeria. Yet the Igbos bounced back remarkably quickly in education, in commerce, in sports, and in entertainment. We even became the technocrats of choice once again for Nigeria. Successive governments, both civilian and military, turned to Igbo technocrats at critical junctures. About Dr. Kalika Kalo, Dr. Chu Okongu, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, Mr. Ernest Ndukwe, and Professor Charles Soludo. We even again became the faces of international glory in sports for Nigeria. Remember Nwankwo Kanu, J.J. Okocha, Christian Chukwu, and even Chioma Ajunwa. But such post-war successes seemed to have fueled resentment instead of helping acceptance. So much so that some people today feel uncomfortable about the very thought of an Igbo person accessing the highest job in the land, even though there is no historical justification for that kind of concern, given that the Igbos have helped develop Nigeria for all Nigerians more than other parts of Nigeria. Even though the Igbos have helped develop other parts of Nigeria more than they have done for Nigeria itself. So the war definitely made what was already bad worse in terms of relationships amongst the people of Nigeria, and especially between the people of Nigeria and the Igbos, who are still doing all they can to integrate themselves into the Nigerian society, finding obstacles at every turn in that good faith effort.
Now let's look at these constructs, these difficulties of reintegration First of all, if I heard you right, you're saying the perception of the Igbo man as a threat was there, and is probably was part of the whole construct of the war. So and you say that to an extent it is still here, so to speak. I would like you to speak a little to the agitations that we have today. What are your thoughts on federalism? What are your thoughts on secession? How can we create a society in Nigeria where everyone is free to make their own contribution and benefit from those contributions, and have other people in this construct we have found ourselves also benefiting in a peaceful manner and in a manner that allows everybody to maximize their potential?
I would say that both secession and proper federalism could be solutions to the Nigerian question. There were 165 sovereign nations in the 60s when I was going through primary school. There are 210 sovereign nations today. That's a 27% increase. And that came about through, in some cases, secessions, and in some cases, negotiated independence. We remember Yugoslavia, we remember Czechoslovakia, we remember Sudan. Eritrea was once part of Ethiopia, and Scotland is still trying to secede. Having been together this long, I think Nigerians are better off in a proper federation in which major components have reasonable political and economic autonomy. Some strong have developed over the years. We are heavily invested in each other. All of that has to mean something. All of that can benefit all Nigerians if we protect the gains for all Nigerians. But if we cannot achieve a fair and stable federation, we would be better off amicably splitting up the entity into smaller, more stable sovereign nations. But if we really want to achieve a stable, more peaceful, more fair federation, there is, in my opinion, no alternative to sitting down and negotiating in good faith. No part will get everything that it wants out of that kind of negotiation. But sitting down to do that is, in my opinion, the only way. In fact, even if our preference is to split the place up peacefully, then we still have to sit down and negotiate. Where we sit, how we sit is less important. Some insist on what they call the Sovereign National Conference. Those in power today and those that will be in power tomorrow and those that were in power yesterday do not want that. We have a National Assembly. I believe we can use it to begin to make incremental progress if we can't deal with everything in one fell swoop. The all or nothing tendency actually leads to paralysis. We've been talking about this so-called restructuring now for decades, and we haven't moved the needle 1 inch. It's better for us, if we can, to use the constructs we already have in the National Assembly to begin to chip away at those things we actually want restructuring to achieve. Fundamentally, what we want is for every part of Nigeria to feel that it belongs in a fair federation, to be able, if necessary, to develop at its own pace while still being a respected and an accepted part of the Nigerian Federation. That shouldn't be too difficult if people come to a negotiation table in good faith, willing to understand what is concerning the other side and willing to make the necessary compromises. If we continue to insist on the way things are, or if we continue to come to discussions with clenched fists instead of open hands, then we will remain in the lose-lose situation that we are in right now. And so for me, it is negotiation, negotiation, negotiation. You can negotiate a proper federalism, or you can negotiate peaceful separation so that the components of Nigeria that result from separation can continue to live peacefully side by side and can continue to do business with each other.
Wow, negotiation, negotiation, negotiation. And that was some serious truth from Ndukwe Uche about the state of Nigeria based on his experience in the Nigerian-Biafra civil war, how we can live together from here. So earlier before that, Titi talked to us about our relationships as Black people with whites. And I often say that if you look at the world, there is always a reason to be at loggerheads. Either it's Black and white, Nigerian and South African, Nigerian and Ghanaian, Igbo and Yoruba, tall and short, men and women. There's always something that creates a boundary, and we can choose either to make it diversity that produces value for every member of society, or we can use that construct of them and us. And here we're saying we can negotiate to make it more positive. Okay, just as a breather, some of these thoughts are heavy thoughts, so we just cool it a little bit down. This is Iwineti Africa, and we've been talking to two amazing icons of thought, Titilola, Louisa, Natasha, Marhino-Anidugbe. I got it. About her book, Emancipados of Lagos, regarding the release from slavery of her ancestors and their return to Africa. We've also been talking to Ndukwe Uche, who wrote the book, Ofia Became Home, the story, the personal story of the Igbere people in the Nigerian-Biafran civil war. And we're, digging into these topics to see what we can make of them today. I have some new comments. I would just like to read them out. And here we try to read all sides, because Iwineti is actually truth in an Amharic, an Ethiopian language. And we used to call this the truth interviews. We're trying to say things that may be censored on normal television, but we try to say it respectfully as they are on this platform. The commenter said, would Andy respectfully agree that Nigeria has been generally open to the Igbos, in quotes, to facilitate the success he claims? That's the question. Has Nigeria been open to the Igbos to facilitate success? And then another comment says, sorry about that, okay. It would seem rich that he claims the Igbos face turns in every corner, except in national politics that is unjustly evident. I did not quite get this one. If you could rephrase, I did not quite get this one, but I don't know whether, Andy, sir, you would like to make a comment on this statement. Has Nigeria been open to the Igbos from your perspective? Okay. What do you think about the comment?
Has Nigeria been open to Igbos?
Yes.
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that Igbos are able to go to every part of Nigeria and put down roots and contribute to every corner of Nigeria. Yes, in the sense that Nigeria does turn to Igbos to help out, as I mentioned before. Yes, in the sense that Igbos are able to play in the Nigerian private space, where they do very, very well. But no, in terms of the fact that when it comes to some sensitive jobs or roles in Nigeria, all kinds of obstacles tend to be thrown up. No, in terms of the fact that there are certain ongoing subtle discriminations against the Igbos for being Igbos. So the credit for much of what the Igbos have contributed and are contributing are actually due more to the Igbos than to the openness of Nigeria to the Igbos. We are knocking on the doors And sometimes we find them open and we push through and go in and help out. So yes, Nigeria is open to us, but Nigeria also closes certain rooms against us.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Certain rooms. Yeah, I like that. Nigeria is a house of many rooms. Apparently, some rooms from the perspective of Ndukwe Uche, writer of Ofia became home. Some rooms are still closed, and we need to negotiate in order to make sure that we are able to access those rooms and everyone can successfully live out their potential in this construct. We're talking about that relationship after the chaos. So let me turn back to Titilola about slavery, the slave mentality. This is bringing it back to the personal level, our actions, or how we go from where we are. What do you think about the slave mentality in the mind of a typical Black person among Africans, whether we are here at home or in the diaspora? What do you think about that? Is it something that needs to be addressed? Have we overcome it? Are we overcoming it? What do we need to do? Ma'am.
Overcoming it is really difficult. And it's difficult because racism still exists. I'm not too sure that it is something that will happen in our lifetimes. And for me, that's very sad. I do feel, however, that if we focus on getting our history told properly from our perspective, we stand a chance of developing young minds that will start to think in the right direction. And I say this because I had to analyze, or I had to look closely at the mindsets of our ancestors. Don't forget, in the same generation, the same man that was picked up from Oyo came back. And undoubtedly, we have stories of them meeting the men who sold them into slavery, the men who captured them and placed them into slavery. And from a Lagos Island perspective or community perspective, there was definitely a decision made at some point to let bygones be bygones, so that a future could be built. And I thought that was a very important message that my ancestors left, and an inheritance that Lagosians picked up. They picked up on the ability to tolerate others. This they had to do for many communities that eventually became one. And the way it became one was through greater levels of tolerance. I say it in my book that, it's not because we believe what you believe. It's not because we, agree with you. It's not because we are coming from the same place as you, but it is because we are all flawed. Understanding that each and every single one of us will have a fault somewhere in our past, and knowing that the important thing is the future. I think that's the way to overcome this. And I think that message comes out in the history when it is told in its entirety from the perspective of everybody who was involved. And that is not just the European side, but also the African story. From the European perspective, I wondered in the book how my ancestors even became Christians in the first place. Because why not throw the baby out with the bathwater? Here are the people who came and picked you up and put you into this misery, and then you adopt their religion. And they didn't adopt it wholeheartedly, I must admit that much. But the parts that they chose to focus on were very instructive into how us as a people can reclaim our identity, reclaim our self-value, and develop values that will enable what you speak of, which is Pan-Africanism, and a future for us that is free from those, things that held us back, those incidences of war and slavery.
Wow, thank you so much. So, building a future, a meaningful future for Africans, is more important than dwelling on the past, because even those who directly experienced these difficulties so long ago were able to overcome the past and take up something positive from the relationship they had with their masters. And those positive things are part of what they came to build Africa with, as we know it today. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you so much. So I'd like to turn over to Ndukwe and ask you to share your final thoughts, as well as what you think anybody who's going to read this book will take away from it. So.
If I may, on the question of where we go from here.
Great.
If I may comment on what I think I heard you ask about where we go from here in terms of relationships amongst the various peoples of Africa. Was that the question?
Yes, please. That's great. That's it. Where we go
then
from
the
here?
First thing I would say is that as bad as things are, some progress has been made, even in Nigeria. I would say that as bad as things look, let's look at the likes of Rwanda and what they've done, the post-war success they have achieved in terms of managing their internal differences. It is doable if we start by acknowledging that there are differences and that some of those differences are understandable. It is doable when we begin to see tribes not necessarily as pockets of enemies. There could even be pockets of competitors. If we acknowledge that every tribe may come to an entity with different needs, different expectations, different views of how the country should be run, and we will be predisposed to engaging each other respectfully. We would be in a position to listen to what everybody brings to a table, if we ever set up the table, as they did in Rwanda, as they did in South Africa when apartheid was abolished. What will bog us down, or shall I say continue to bog us down, is coming to discussions with fixed views and refusing to be moved even an inch. It is approaching discussions as fight you must win at the expense of the other. It is the zero-sum approach to discussing issues that could stop us from making more progress. Most of our problems are discussable, they are solvable, but they will all involve some degree of compromise. In Nigeria, it's about time we took real steps towards addressing the imbalance in our political structure. And we do not need to look to the West or the East for examples. We can look to some success stories on the African continent. Even though some of those countries are smaller, far less complex than Nigeria is. As an Igbo man, I look at my Yoruba brother as a brother who may have different expectations of how Nigeria should be run. I look at my northern brother as a brother who may have different expectations from the Nigerian Federation. If they would do the same, then when we come together to discuss the way forward, we will be coming together to discuss our common future. Whether we stay together or stay apart, we will still have common future. As long as you share a boundary with somebody, it doesn't matter what flag you fly, you will have a common future. You will have to do business with each other. So we should approach the future with that kind of mindset. there is enough in every African country and on the continent itself for all its people. Why don't we approach things in such a way that we can not just share, but build together? Why don't we approach things in such a way that the plenty that God has blessed Africa with is fairly available to all of us? It is a tendency to think that if I win something, you lose. It's not necessarily the case. It's a tendency to want to have 100% of nothing instead of 10% of a bigger pie. So if we can switch our mindset from that of scrambling for something that is there to building together, building a bigger pie, if you like, before we start sharing, I think we can make much better progress. If we start showing more tolerance for differences, and that should start with the younger people among us, I think we can make progress. But if we continue to approach issues only from the point of view of what is good for me and not what is good for us, then all these negotiations we are talking about, all these conferences we are talking about, will simply become one more playground where we disagree and paralyze each other. So let's open up our minds if we want to change anything. Let's acknowledge where we are and acknowledge that we are different people with common interest. And then we may be able to make progress together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. That is, I think it's very deep what you just said. Being able to look in each other in the face, be honest about our intent, and decide we want to share. There's enough to go around. Can we live together and share? Whether those boundaries are those defined by those we call our slave masters, our colonialists, or the boundaries are those we actually originally had. You know, I had a conference just recently that says the title was I think it's Ghana. That is the Ghana Forum, the Grow Ghana Forum, something of that nature. And I asked myself, maybe I should do a Grow Nigeria, Grow Senegalese. But if you think about it, these boundaries were defined not by us, but by a generation of people who decided on those boundaries based on their interests. Now, why do we fight on the basis of those boundaries? Why do we identify ourselves on the basis of those boundaries? Now, and like Andy said, we can choose to live together whether those boundaries remain as they are now or otherwise. The important thing is that we can appreciate one another and share what God has blessed us with. So let me turn over to Titi and also ask for your final words concerning this conversation and your book, and what you think someone can take away from your book, Emancipados of Lagos, as an individual. Please go ahead.
The great takeaway is that our history is important, and it must be told, and it must be told by us. So whilst I'm saying don't dwell on the history, I am saying it is extremely important to know the history in order to be able to move forward. In terms of the discussion on where Nigeria should be right now, I think based on what I have seen or read and experienced over the course of writing the book, has helped me have a better appreciation of what the future could possibly be like. I call it in my book their superpower, but the superpower of those who were emancipated and came back to Africa was teamwork. That was their superpower. Even in Brazil, the reason they held the entire markets in Brazil to ransom because of teamwork. They came back to Africa with nothing, with no roots, without being able to connect to family or friends. And they still formed a community that was strong, and they built a nation by teamwork. And so I agree with Andy on that point. We must find a way to work together and focus on our common on the things that are common to all of us. And there are things that are common to all of us, and things that we want. And if we focus on those things, the future will definitely be brighter.
Wow, thank you very much. Focus on the future, build the future together, face the truth, tell us ourselves the truth, and work with what from where we are now to where we all want to be. I am sure nobody wants conflict, nobody wants antagonism. And like Andy said, no matter what you do, you still have to live as a neighbor, whether you draw the boundary on a map or otherwise, the person still has to live next to you. So it's incredible today. Very deep thoughts, very profound thoughts, but our time is up and we wish we could continue talking, but I want us to just take the lessons from these tips and make it a point of duty to get the books when they're available on Amazon. Right now, Ofia Became Home is available on Amazon. I got my copy directly, but I have a soft copy on Kindle from Amazon. And there are so many comments. I would just like to read them before we round up today. Before we go away for today. Okay, I appreciate Ladi a lot. He said, "It's me, Kenneth." That's Ladi. He spoke to us on this program about unemployment in Africa, okay. And that was the most.
I think
yes, sorry.
Did I hear you
ask
if there is any further comment from me?
Yes, I'll come back to you. Just 1 minute, sir. Just 1 minute. I'll just read the comments, then I'll come. Yeah, I'll just read the comments. So yes, so Ladi mentioned that. Yes, that was Ladi. He spoke earlier on the unemployment in Africa. And Ike Mary says, right, we need to be more open-minded. That was in response to what Andy earlier said, more open-minded. And I think it was Ladi too who says, Andy speaks with great wisdom. Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. Ijoma Okando says, very well said, sir. Everyone is listening to you, sir. And James says, I really enjoyed today's discussion. Big issues discussed with intelligence by intellectuals. I will try to read both learned panelists' books. Great one. And then I think it's Ladi again who says, history should seal the fragility of the past and open new doors to cooperation. Amazing. Right? Ijoma says, we must find a way to work together. I love that. All right. Okay, so let me just also hear finally from Andy on last words for tonight before we turn over. Please go ahead, sir.
Okay. All right. First, I'll give you my summary of the book, since I haven't had the opportunity so far to speak to you about it. When the Nigeria-Biafra Civil War arrived at my Igbere clan on March 30, 1969, the war had already been raging for 2 years and had already consumed most of Biafra. Our Igbere people, my family among them, had already been pushed back to our village of Igbere. There were thousands and thousands of us in the village in March of 1969 when the war arrived at our doorsteps, unannounced, with ferocious bombing, ferocious shelling, not unlike what you are seeing today happening in Ukraine. There weren't many options of free destinations to run to. We therefore ran into our remote forests and farmlands, not sure they would provide refuge. But holding together, we made those remote farms and forests not only our refuge, but our new home for 9 months. That's what this book is about. Those 9 difficult months that the Igbere people had to fend for themselves without help from the outside world. But it is more about Igbere people as tenacious survivors than as helpless victims. The book shows that we tried to recreate the life we left behind, but for the most part, we were forced to live and die like the animals that were our new neighbors. We scavenged, We hunted, we farmed, and we tried to experiment with anything the land and waters could offer for food. For things like salt, we took grave risks with cross-border trade. In spite of all our best efforts, we were always hungry. We lived in shacks that offered little by way of protection from anything. We buried our dead quickly without ceremony. But despite the misery that was visited upon us, we were never sorry for ourselves. We held our heads high, we worked together, and we mostly survived. So that's what Ofia Became Home is trying to share with the posterity of Igbere and with the world. Not just that we were victims of war, but that we refused to behave like victims. We chose to confront the situation as we saw it. We held together and faced down that situation. Because of that, most of us came out of that war intact and were able to resume our lives as quickly as every other part of Igbo land. But my closing remarks on the big topic of today is to remind us that when the knee was on George Floyd's neck, no black person asked what his tribe was. No black person asked what his religion was. We were all outraged. We all felt that knee on our necks. Why is it that when we come home, we start fighting when we are able to identify with all the George Floyds of this world? Why is it that when injustice is visited to a black person somewhere in the world, we are all black people, period? But when we come home, we start fighting over things we should be working together to improve. That sentiment that made us identify with George Floyd is available to us wherever we are as black people. If we tap into that continuously, we will find that there's much for us to work together on than to squabble about. But I'm not being naive. I know that squabbling is in the human nature. Wars have existed since the beginning of times, and wars will exist tomorrow. But we need to encourage ourselves not to only focus on what will bring wars, but also to occasionally turn attention to what can avoid wars. For in the end, the only way we can enjoy being here is by being here in peace with each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And I must say with that, we have to close out. I'd like to thank those who joined us today. Thank you very much for being with us, Titilola Awuboro. Let me mention the full name again. Titilola Louisa Natasha Marhino-Anidugbe. Yes, I got it perfectly. I appreciate you so much, ma'am. And that's a wonderful book coming up. I was at the launch, that's why I know little about it, and I'm sure when it comes out in full, it will be awesome. So follow Titilola on LinkedIn. I think she's also on Facebook, and just so you get to know when she will release the book to the public. And I'd also like to thank Mr. Ndukwe Uche, and in our dialect, we call him Mr. Ndukwe Uche, and I appreciate the wisdom he has shared here with us, and the book he has written, Ofia Became Home. I have a physical copy here, beautiful book, and I've read a little of it, and it's beautifully written, deep, insightful, and a lot of culture from our place showing up in the book. Do get it on Amazon, get your copy wherever you are in the world. And we've talked about slavery and war today, and they seem to be discordant topics, but they are related, because in the aftermath of these catastrophic events, we have to live with each other. We have to define a future for ourselves. We have to ask ourselves, what do we really want as people? Do we want the downfall of the other person, or do we want to go up? If we want to go up, why don't we all go up together? Thank you for joining us today. I appreciate you. Thank you, Joma. Thank you, Stanbic Laos, yes, Mohammed. Viola Ate is great to see you. Chidiu Kando, Mohammed Mahubi. Ladi Tokosi, James, I appreciate you joining us today. Do share the video and keep following us on Iwinete Africa. We'll come back to you next time with more amazing.